Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm excited to introduce you, Amy Hrehovcik. Right?
No, it's great.
It was good.
It
Yes.
was good.
Does it piss you off when people like butcher your name or nah?
No, not at all. I used to have a standing joke when I was selling in New York City as an outside sales rep, hopping from skyscraper to skyscraper. Um, I would make a joke when going through security at each of these buildings. They'd ask for your license, and then every single time it's how do you pronounce your last name? And
Uh,
my canned answer was always Smith. And it was good for like a solid like 30-second chuckle. So, but I'll spare everyone in your audience. But that's the joke.
nice. Well, I think we got connected in a weird way, right? I think I was prospecting Remesh, and then that's how we got connected. And then, ever since I met you, I feel like you've always been super helpful and just you're always so kind with your time and your energy. Like, you clearly like helping people and you like serving, the whole industry of sales and sales enablement, right? So, really, every time I speak with you, I always feel like energized, and I feel, you definitely have an ability to make people feel confident in themselves. So I think I'm grateful for our friendship, and yeah, I'm excited to share your wisdom with everyone else. I have I would say most of the people who listen to my podcast they're either account executives
Mm.
or they're BDRs slash SDRs.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm glad that you started with how we originally connected because I couldn't remember when I'm leading into this recording. But yes, it's my pleasure to support those that are supporting others, Davidson. And I, I think I just want to add one slight caveat to what you described about my willingness to help, and that is that I tend to prioritize spending time with people that are actively working on themselves and also helping others. And that I think is a not rare, rare is too strong of a word, but it's a special quality that is more often than not, not the first thing that comes across when you interact with somebody. So I want to say that it was so obvious that that was what you were about, both um, as early interactions as an AE at LinkedIn indicated to me, but also once I dug into your podcast and your writing, I mean, it was a pleasure to see someone in an AE role that was kind of taking on this. Let me not just give back to my peers, but also to the industry on a macro level. So again, it's my pleasure to support and to aid people like yourself.
Thank you, Amy. And I think one of the cool things, like every time I interact with you, because I think like we all have similarities with people that we meet wherever we go, but I think like I would say it's safe to say like you're like a perfectionist, right? In a way.
I'm a recovering perfectionist, I like to say, because yeah, no, I like to not just get things perfect, but I like to win as well. And for a long time, I was really fixated on this idea of speed, not just doing it perfectly, but doing it quickly and perfectly, which I think is very common in like top performing sales roles in particular. Um, but I'm going through a serious process of unlearning, and this is one specifically the perfectionism is, I'm not there yet, and I'm certainly on a journey. But oh yes, you are right to say that used to for a very long time aspire to that. But thank goodness I have, at least in theory, seen the era of that, and no longer hold myself to such an extreme unobtainable or not sustainable metric, success metric.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's helped you have so much success, right, in your career, and I think it serves you. It's gotten you like so many cool experiences and have met so many interesting people. But I think to your point, like we can be we can use it when we want to, but then I'm sure there's some days where you want to um be a little bit like less hard on yourself, right? Or even just like the people around you, right? So I think we all struggle with that, where we often kind of project our own like perfectionism onto others, and sometimes like it can be exhausting, you know.
It's an understatement. At least for me, I feel good actually speaking about this because I've recently written an article that um, I shared very freely about my experiences with burnout and how deep down that particular rabbit hole it went. And so, yes, I think that it's a dangerous slide, and it's just not sustainable. And particularly in sales, I think it's very, very important to not just unravel yourself from this idea of perfectionism and constantly, um, I don't know, striving for a version of success that's based on an outcome. And what I've learned, particularly in the past couple of months, is that there is so much joy and pleasure to be had in the diligent pursuit of incremental progress. And instead of competing against external factors, it's really just about looking at your efforts and your results yesterday and trying to, just get a little bit better on a daily basis. And when you've done so, to really take a moment every day and just embrace the present and kind of celebrate that progress, however small. Life changing, Davidson, life changing.
That's pretty deep. Yeah. That it's especially, like I think we have a culture, a corporate culture of like instant gratification, or there's the persona that we all portray. And not many of us are so open to sharing like actually the behind the scenes that goes on right within our own the self dialogue or the self talk. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, you see all these amazing salespeople win all these awards, but every time I do interview with one of the President's Club winners, I'm always like, hey, like what would you like preparing before we start the interview? Like, what would you want others to know that you want me to highlight? And they say like honestly, like a lot of people have said like you make it seem easy, but they don't realize like the back end, like what goes on, like how early I'm waking up, and how I'm exhausted by Friday. I'm like I pass out like at 6 o'clock and I sleep for like 12 hours,
Mm-hmm.
so it is a real thing, and I think especially like now during COVID, it's harder because so many of us, like so much of our identity is tied towards our jobs and how good of a company we work for, or how many presidents clubs that we've been through, and it's interesting to see, I'm seeing at a macro level everyone's shifting to, oh, actually like life isn't just about winning awards. Like there's more, to your point, like the impact that you're having on society, right? So it's interesting, like I see a lot of people shifting their values in a way sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing though, there's a catch-22 to this idea of having an impact on society. And I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with a mentor of mine right before I crashed, I guess you could say, or the start of my official like breakdown. And that was, I had moved to San Francisco at that point, and this person had come to visit for business. And so we did a lunch or dinner during his trip, and he essentially saw me and was like, "Whoa, Amy, you need to take care of yourself. You need like I would." His advice was actually like, "You need to stand in front of a large body of water on a regular basis so that you can put yourself and your um, I guess smallness." He didn't say that, but this is how I interpreted it. Hindsight being what it was, in perspective. And I thought that was a great piece of advice. And it dovetailed with a line that really resonated with me in one of Ryan Holiday's books. I think it was in The Ego is the Way. And it's this idea that when you think that you can have like this kind of impact on a macro level, that's really a twisted version of ego. And when you allow that to drive you exclusively, it there are negative ramifications. At that point, I was still working in the legal vertical, and this idea of like access to justice, or the countless millions of people that are just priced out of the legal market, was driving me. And it just, again, looking back on it, it was like, okay, wow, like it was just silly. It was silly to take on that weight. It was silly to think that, what I was doing every day was going to, make or break the situation. And it was a very counterintuitive, I guess you could say, aha moment for me. But one that I think is important to highlight. So yes, I'm all for like purpose. I am all for driving the greater good, and injecting transparency, or combating misinformation, again, on a macro level. But at the same time, it is goes hand in hand now with this, I guess, a balancing of my own frailty and my own smallness.
Yeah, that's deep. I mean, you definitely seem like a lot more grounded. Like, so it seems like in the last few months, you probably like did a lot of like inter work, right? You seem much more like relaxed and at peace than let's say when we first met, like a while back.
Mm-hmm. No, it's amazing. You're absolutely right, and I received that in a big way. But yes, I have done a tremendous amount of work on myself, and um, I can't speak highly enough to how much peace I have received, and calmness, um, for having done so.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think like some of the top performers, like a lot of whether you're a top performing SDR or whatever, right? Like I think sometimes people like beat themselves up and people harden themselves, right? And sometimes it does give them the feel to kind of like, oh, I want to be number one, right? But I think it can be like self-destructive, right? So I think like a better way of dealing with that is just like, all right, I know like I'm committed to the cause, and I'm gonna do the best I can, and not be so attached to like the result and the outcome, but just trust the process and trust that like, okay, I'm doing because of my incremental growth, I'll naturally hit my goals anyways, just because I'm putting my all into it, right? I think it's a different place to come from versus like, oh, like, of course, like I ended this week at number 3, like that would happen to me. It's like
Mhm.
totally different places, and sometimes the results, so it's interesting. Like I'm definitely noticing that a lot.
Yeah. So I'm. Ooh,
Oh no, is the volume?
okay, so you reminded me what you just said about the importance of trusting the process, which is something I know that I learned from, by extension, from you when you mentioned your coach on your blog, who I then contacted and started a professional relationship with. But yes, so Laura had helped me kind of break some of the patterns that I had, deeply entrenched myself in. And that was, instead of focusing so hard on this external outcome, it was, trusting the process and like loving it,
Hmm.
so that again, you could find that joy on a daily basis.
That that's such a timely message because so my during the months of COVID, or from I would say for like 4 months or so, I wasn't doing that well, like results right wise, right? But then this, or I guess I'm being a little bit hard on myself, but not to what I wanted to. And then all of a sudden this quarter, I might pass 400% of my number, right? So it's sort of
Mhm.
nothing. I don't think anything really changed, but I think it's like just trust the process. Like, you're gonna have you're gonna have some bad months and you're gonna have some great months. And this is very timely message because I feel like I'm going through that like right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I say this often, and I'm going to say it again, but I think that some of these lessons are, I mean, they're relevant for everyone, but they're so much more relevant for such a like a performance-based profession like enterprise sales or B2B selling in particular. And, while I no longer carry a bag, I did so for 12 years, and now delight in building systems to kind of support those that do, not just support, but like empower. Um, but it's fundamentally different from the way that most of us are taught about the profession, and the way that most of us are managed. I mean, I know that you're in a unique situation where you have, a phenomenal manager, as you beautifully wrote about in one of your last one of your last articles. But I don't think that that's the experience that most of us, myself included, have had.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, having a good manager makes such a difference, right? Like, there's managers. I think my friend said it best. I think he's like a mid-market rep at a SaaS company, but he was like, there's managers that are really good with the sticks and carrots, right? Like they know when to kind of like lure you with the president's clubs and like the acknowledgments or public acknowledgments, and they also know how to scare the living crap out of you if you're not doing well. They'll make that like, hey, like this is not what we're these are not the results I'm looking for. So
Right.
yeah, I think my manager does, to give people context, she managed the year in our learning division, which is still a lot of people. We ended up being like the number one team across globally, but I think like what she does a really good job of is just pushing us like just enough to know that like, hey, like you're capable of much more than you think you are, but then also like like the reality too, right? It's like, hey, like these are some of your weaknesses, like we should work on it. So I think it's hard. Like I feel like being a manager is such a hard skill, and I think I've learned to how I can respect. Like I feel like now I've had time to reflect, and I respect that she kept pushing me like more. But I remember during it, I was just so uncomfortable. I was like, oh God, like I really don't want to work on this. So
It's crazy because I covered this topic extensively in the mental health article, mental health and sales, that was just featured on the Andy Paul podcast, interestingly enough. And I love his headline, which is that no one escapes. But the research that I'm doing now for this next article has to do with gender and sales and the implications of, male managers versus female managers are becoming increasingly more apparent with every study that I find, again, within sales and externally. Yet, sadly, women managers and leaders in sales are still, grossly underrepresented. However, I think LinkedIn is an incredible organization to look at and to point at as one that has done a tremendous amount of work to inject diversity and not just equality, but equity into like the promotions system.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, I always love interacting with reps and like individual contributors from LinkedIn for this particular reason, because you can just taste the heightened sense of like understanding of what coaching is and how to use observable moments and help a person to kind of move to the next level based on where they want to go. And it's just, it's not something that's very common, again, across our profession, but LinkedIn, I think, is really doing a phenomenal job. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I think coaching. If I was to summarize like my article about her, I would say like she's just a phenomenal coach, right? Like she's so adaptive, that everyone on our team is so different, and it's on purpose, right? She set it up that way so that we all add a different element and a different dimension to the team. And because we're so different, like, we have people who are super product heavy, like they know the ins and out of the processes and things like, rules of engagement, like they know all of that, right? And then you have people like me who are definitely more like relational based, and like I've had success because I've leveraged internal relationships, internal partners. But and then you have people who are very direct, very concise, and have like the executive presence, right? So I think what makes her brilliant is that she's able to acknowledge all of that and obviously like capitalize on our strengths, but then really dedicate every week to work on our weaknesses as well, so that it's not pulling us back, and then leveraging each other to kind of fill in those gaps. So I'm very fortunate to have her manager.
You know, I want to, that there's a thing called dynamic systems or dynamic sales processes. And that it's this idea that you don't have this like rigid sales process, and it allows for the frontline contributors to test and iterate with different ways to bring value to the market. And when you find something that works, to then bring it back to your team quickly and to kind of socialize those best practices. And that is so again, dynamic systems, dynamic processes. But it's so rare in this realm of sales, because it's just much more common to see a leader that has, just carries over their own past experiences with sales and creates this very rigid process that allows for no iteration whatsoever. And it's like, and with significantly lower degrees of success, which is, is a nice way of saying that you're burning through lots of human beings, right? They're leaving either as top performers that have burned out, or air quotes underperformers, and that is just a shame. But it's great to hear, but also not surprising that LinkedIn and your manager in particular has done a great job with, reversing some of the ingrained echo chamber type wisdom that just tends to get recycled around sales leadership circles, which, by the way, in technology is still, less than 18% of sales leaders right now are women. And what's more interesting even is that women tend to build more diverse teams. So it's almost like the teams of are almost at the 50-50 breakdown by gender, and race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status. Whereas on the male side, it's less than 24% are women. And I'm part of the, in my opinion, and I guess even to take it a step study this year that said that 4% of sales officers are satisfied with their current gender dynamics, and which is particularly offensive to me, because when you actually get into the research from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we're actually regressing in the past couple of years for various reasons. But it's not, it doesn't make me hopeful to when I read a stat like that. But also motivated to write about it and draw attention to it. But again, still stand next to that large body of water and keep it in perspective.
Yeah, that's good advice. There's something about like nature and be like things that just is, right? Like a body of water is just that, like, it doesn't have to be a certain way, like because I think with human beings, like I think we want them to be a certain way, like, oh, we want them to be nicer human beings, or oh, give me, at least get to know me before you ask for something. Like there's intentions behind it, whereas like nature is just is. And I think being in sales, like it's beautiful because you're so adaptive to so many human beings, and you could be a chameleon. Like that's how you become successful. So I think it's like a curse and a blessing, because if you meet someone and they can't like help you out, then it's like, oh, like, why would I like spend so much energy like getting to know you? But to your original point with diversity, yeah, it's interesting because I do think, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's statistics on this, but I think women leaders tend to be more like empathetic in general. Like, like that's like a pretty big generalization, but like statistically speaking, right? Like I remember reading data saying that women are just better listeners, and are able to be a little bit more like adaptive. But then the catch 22 is that when women are a bit more assertive, they're automatically labeled as like being, I don't even want to say the word, but insert not nice word here. And it's crazy, right? And I've been guilty of that conscious bias myself, where I remember, like when I was like much younger in my career, oh man, like why is she so like aggressive, right? But if it was a guy, I wouldn't use the word aggressive. I would be like, oh, he's assertive. But it's like these unconscious bias that we all have. um so yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have a long way to go, but I am happy to see that companies like LinkedIn is taking more of an active approach to promoting women, rightfully so, right? So yeah, this is it's a big topic that and some of our best. I know when I worked at TriNet, some of the best were W2ing like 500, 600K, 700K, like were women, right? And yeah, I think we have a long way to go, but I definitely see us making progress, and maybe I'm looking at it through the lens of a LinkedIn employee, so it's a bit biased, probably.
Yeah, no, you guys are very fortunate over there. Technically speaking, we are going backwards. And if you look at the past 30 years, there really hasn't been a great deal of progress, which is, I think, one of the bigger items that I plan to call attention to with this next article. Yeah, and what's interesting to your point about the women at TriNet, there's been a tremendous amount of research that I found, including one of Gong's more recent research efforts that calls attention to the fact that women are actually outperforming men on the like individual contributor ranks.
Yeah.
And I was brainstorming with my editor on this next piece yesterday, and he was looking at a lot of the research and maybe some like rough thoughts that I had started to develop and connections that I was drawing. The thing that he had was most surprising to him was how quantifiable his the individual performance numbers by gender, because that is so often misconstrued. But you're right about I want to go back to this what you had said about the implicit biases that you inadvertently, not that you came to realize as an older, more mature account executive, but because that one in particular, when I was selling, I found it quite frustrating, actually, to say the same exact sentence, right, that one of my male peers sitting across the way had said like the week prior, and his sentence was, and mine was, demonized.
Mm.
And it was mind-blowing how hard it was to convey to my male manager at the time about that divide. I mean, it's mind-blowing. especially, and there's actually another thing I want to touch on, which is that I think the way that we kind of frame the gender dialogue in corporate right now is a little bit off, in that if you really get into the research, there's not that many like biological differences between the genders.
Hmm.
And when we frame it as such, it perpetuates this, poor cycle of, expectation. Like, we need women to come off as kind or nurturing because that's their role. And really, again, we're not necessarily hot wired in that way. We're socialized to be that. And so when we perpetuate those socializations that kind of carry over, as opposed and frame them as being biological,
Mm.
we are doing ourselves a massive, massive disservice. And it's one more point, and then I'll pause for a second. It's problematic because, like, old names, like, for example, the confidence gap is being one of the reasons why we don't see enough women in leadership, or the mommy track, and this is the problem. And so and then you start to see like wide scale efforts to try to address these, improve the root cause, or even relevant at all. It's all wasted energy that has had no impact or very little impact, especially if you look at the lack of progress. And so, like, for example, there is no such thing as a confidence gap beyond the age of 25. In fact, we start to see that reverse. And by the time you're at 38, women tend to be way more confident. And really the problem is, to your original point, how we're being perceived. I could say the same thing for mentorship programs and the lack of sponsorship opportunities that are afforded to women through these mentorship programs, where men get this extra, push or connection rate with actual sponsors that could potentially hire them, which is not something that women are afforded. And it's that sponsorship that gives the leg up.
Hmm.
Efforts that are for women, but very little attention on like allyship programs or advocacy, or even peer-to-peer learning opportunities for men to be able to call out the I call them the softer sexism that female peers just endure on a daily basis, both internally and from the client base a lot of times. And again, without touching on those as being key critical factors to kind of moving the needle, everything that's being done, it seems like a great deal of waste from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, definitely some deep topics. I mean, I think it ultimately it does start like from the individual, right? So like so my ask is like, what can I do personally to help the cause, right? Because I think it starts at the individual level. Obviously, systematic, like that's like a whole nother. We could probably spend like another hour just talking about that. But for me, saying, when am I, labeling someone, like aggressive, right? When they're just taking charge of their, or, or being proactive about their careers, right? Um, and then also, yeah, like saying things. So I'm glad you corrected me on that, because like even saying things like, "Oh yeah, all of my women managers have been like very empathetic," versus my male managers who are, maybe not as great listeners, right? It's like it's perpetuating, the problem that we have, systematically. So yeah, this has all been, yeah, definitely would like to have you come back for round two, because I feel like there's so much we can talk about, in this topic. But I do appreciate you, Amy, and I'm so happy that we're having these conversations, because not everyone does, and it is needed, and I think if you're listening to this, reflect and think of the times where you maybe haven't given someone a chance, just because because of just unconscious bias, or just assumptions that you have, right? So You know, what you said about like unlearning is inspiring. You know, I think we all, as the more we progress in our careers, I think sometimes we it's harder to learn, you know, because we have so much experience, so much evidence of a certain preconceived notion. So yeah, thanks.
I'm going to I want to add one quick caveat. It's called confirmation bias, and evidence that supports what we already want to believe.
Yeah.
It starts to build up. And this is where I think unlearning is a phenomenal way to think about it, because it does present, and I'm talking to myself when I say this, it presents an opportunity to reset and to kind of just wipe the slate clean and observe things with a fresh set of eyes, which in my process improvement training, we call this the naive questioner. And it is a phenomenally valuable role. And so I think to the extent that we each can kind of channel that idea of being a novice and being a naive questioner and really challenge the existing narratives as we see them playing out around us, that's where, to your point about what can I do, that's where you start to feel the change in yourself, and then, you know, from there you're able to kind of give back from a place of strength and centered calmness. Which I have, to your point, picked up on a lot of in the past couple of months, which has been amazing.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Amy. I do think, you know, I feel like the good thing about naming some of these things, like when you corrected me and said it's cognitive bias, it helps when you name it, it helps give you like, well, the awareness, I think like the realization helps us be able to deal with it and process it instead of like kind of be like a victim or like, or just because it's unconscious or whatever it is, it's like, it's harder to deal with it, right? So I think the more you name these things, like, you know, the more awareness you have, you're able to do something about it. So that's a takeaway I'm getting from the conversation.
I'm laughing because if I'm going to name it, I might as well use the correct name. It's a confirmation bias if I misspoke, which happens sometimes.
Oh, right. Confirmation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, thank you for saying so. Being able to have consistent terms that allows for a group of people to have like meaningful dialogues and kind of minimize the misinterpretation that comes with vague or ambiguous interpretations, and therefore misunderstandings and arguments, you know, help people like yourself that are perpetuating these conversations are massively valuable as well. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of be here and, you know, start to talk about this stuff, which I think I'm going to be pretty active about for the foreseeable future. So yeah, you're the first, Davidson.
No, that's awesome. I mean, it's awesome to meet people who are clearly about something, right? Like we can go through our lives crushing our numbers, going to all these cool vacations and stuff, but the people who ultimately, you know, leave a legacy or leave an impact are the ones that are having these somewhat sometimes uncommon, sometimes uncomfortable conversations. And you know, even if it piques one person's interest, and you know, they start looking into how they can be responsible for you know, how their confirmation bias is not serving them. This is a very valuable conversation. I'm sure we'll have many more. So
Awesome.
appreciate you.
Davidson, right back at you.